and oil industry, but we regulate the coal industry, and we also regulate the minerals development across the state, which is sand and gravel and other precious metals that's found in our state. And we're very rich in those metals, and we mine a lot of those here. Tonight, I have with me, of course, as stated earlier, a director of our division of gas and oil, that is located out in Lebanon, in southwest Virginia. But that's not to say that we don't come out this way when issues dealing with gas and oil arise. And certainly in this case, we're here tonight to tell you about gas and oil development, not only across the state, but tonight we're going to be specifically talking about gas and oil development in a tidewater basin area. And as some of you know, I'm certainly the county attorney, and some of you may have also looked at. Some of you may have also researched, there's much more criteria when gas and oil development is proposed in the tidewater area. And we're going to be specifically talking about those. We're not here to provide any opinions. We're just here to provide you the information that we have on gas and oil development. And also our state geologist is going to provide you with some information that we have on the geology of the Taylorsville Basin, and also the water resources that we have become aware of in the Taylorsville Basin through our years of research. So at this time, I'd like to introduce to you David Spears, our state geologist, and David also works with our Geology and Mineral Resource Division in Charlottesville.
Thank you, Butch. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Clicker, thank you. Yes, I'm going to speak briefly about the geology and the natural gas resources of the Taylorsville Basin and how we know what we know about what might be there. Just briefly, Butch already mentioned the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy and some of the things we do around the state. This is our mission statement stated on our website. We enhance the development and conservation of energy and mineral resources in a safe and environmentally sound manner to support a more productive economy. So the Taylorsville Basin is one of several what we call Mesozoic basins, but I'd like to also point out other areas of the state where energy development has gone on and some of the things that our department has been involved with in recent years. Here in southwestern Virginia, 7 counties in southwestern Virginia are the traditional coal, natural gas, and oil producing part of the state. That's the only part of the state right now that is producing natural gas, oil, and coal. We produce not quite 20 million tons a year of coal in Virginia, not quite 150 billion cubic feet of natural gas in Virginia, and then a little bit of oil, under 20,000 barrels a year of oil. But you see the Marcellus Shale is in the western part of the state. This is kind of on the back burner now. There was some interest in that several years ago, but that interest has been withdrawn. You may have heard about the Colesville uranium deposit in the news over the last couple of years. That's also on the back burner now. The offshore, the question of offshore oil and gas here, this was a lease sale that was scheduled by the federal department. The Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management was going to have a lease sale for offshore oil and gas in 2011, but that lease sale was canceled after the Deepwater Horizon incident. And then the Virginia wind energy area is another thing our agency has been involved in. We actually hold a research lease out there with the Virginia Wind Energy Consortium to do some research on the wind potential offshore, but also the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management recently issued some leases to Dominion Power for commercial wind development in that area there. But what I'm really here tonight to talk about is the Taylorsville Basin, which is one of these we call Mesozoic basins. You heard the term Triassic Basin before. Triassic is a period within the Mesozoic era. So these basins are of the Triassic period or the Mesozoic era. A closer up map of the Taylorsville Basin. This is King George County up here. This brown outline is the Taylorsville Basin in Virginia. Here's the Potomac River, and it goes up under Maryland as well. But this is just one of several basins. The Richmond Basin, just west of Richmond, is exposed The Taylorsville Basin is exposed in just a small area of Hanover County, and then the rest of it is buried beneath the coastal plain. And as you can see, these black dots on here, these represent a dozen wells, 12 wells that were drilled in the Taylorsville Basin starting in 1917, and then the last well was drilled in 1992. And I would like to point out that there is a well in King George County up here that was actually hydraulically fractured in 1968. This kind of dashed line here is a cross-section that I'm going to show on my next slide. So if you were to take a slice through the earth, what would it look like in that area? So there are basically three kinds of rocks in here. First of all, let me point out this gray rectangle here. This is what we call a seismic line. This is a line that was collected by Virginia Tech in about 1980. They came through here with trucks and vibrated the earth and then recorded the reflections that came back from those vibrations, and it allowed them to image the deep structure of the earth in this area. And so what we see are there are three basic categories of rock here, what we call crystalline basement rocks. So these would be igneous and metamorphic rocks that have essentially no pore spaces in them, essentially no organic matter, no potential for oil or gas. The Taylorsville Basin would be this area here in the brown. So these are Mesozoic age sedimentary rocks, primarily sandstone and shale. And then along this line here are some of the wells you've heard mentioned. These are three of the wells that were drilled down to 5,500 feet back in the 1980s, just to test some of the potential of the Taylorsville Basin. But as you can see, there's quite a bit of untested rock down here. These wells in this part of the basin didn't reach quite to the bottom. And then over the top of that, the blue area is what we call the coastal plain. So these are younger sediments that were deposited as the Atlantic Ocean came in. Actually, the Atlantic Ocean has risen and fallen several times in this area, and these are sediments that were deposited in a shallow, ancient version of the Atlantic Ocean. And this is where we find these aquifers you've heard people talk about. And I'll mention a little bit more about the aquifers later, but I will point out that all 12 of these wells that were drilled in the past did drill through those coastal plain aquifers, and the Virginia Oil and Gas Act and the Code of Virginia and DMME's regulations require these companies to drill through these shallow aquifers with fresh water and then run steel casing and cement that casing in place before they drill any deeper. So those freshwater aquifers are protected before they drill into the oil and gas bearing portion of the rocks there. The U.S. Geological Survey recently completed a study of the potential for oil and gas in these Mesozoic basins. It's got kind of a funny title, Assessment of Undiscovered Oil and Gas Resources. Well, how can you assess undiscovered oil and gas resources? Well, they use a statistical technique. They look at the nature of the rocks, they look at the information from wells that have been drilled there in the past, and using a statistical method, they make an estimate of how much undiscovered resource may be there. So on page 2 of this fact sheet is a table that summarizes the information from these various basins, and the Taylorsville Basin is right at the top there in the red rectangle. You see this F95 here. This is part of their statistical estimate. What they're saying is that we have 95% certainty that there's at least 516 billion cubic feet of undiscovered natural gas in this basin. And we have a 5% certainty that there's 1.8 trillion cubic feet of gas in the basin. And then they take a mean as their kind of answer that's given by this technique. And the answer is they have assigned 1.06 trillion cubic feet of gas to the Taylorsville Basin. Well, what does that mean? How much natural gas is that? It's about 2.5 times Virginia's total annual consumption. Our annual consumption, both domestic residential, industrial, commercial, is about 400 billion cubic feet a year. So this would be about, if it were all to be developed, it would be about a 2.5-year supply for the whole state. That would be the equivalent amount. In comparison, the U.S. Geological Survey, using the exact same technique, assigned 410 trillion cubic feet to the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania, New York, and West Virginia. So just looking at the numbers, this is roughly 1/400th the size of the Marcellus, 0.25% the size, 0.25% the size of the Marcellus Shale. Much smaller area, much smaller volume of rock. The USGS has also recently completed a report on the groundwater potential of the Potomac Aquifer, which is the deepest of the aquifers out here, and there's a lot of information in this study. This just came out last year. You can find it online. And in this study is a groundwater cross-section, similar to the cross-section I drew before, but this one has quite a bit of vertical exaggeration. That's why this surface here actually dips very, very gently toward the east. But this has 80 times vertical exaggeration out of the one I showed before had no vertical exaggeration. But anyway, this runs from Fredericksburg over here over to Accomack County on the eastern shore. And these are water wells that are used to control the information on this cross-section. These are a couple of faults that are in the Fredericksburg area that we know cut the coastal plain sediments. But so the Potomac Aquifer is all this down here, and it's divided into 3 parts by the U.S. Geological Survey: Upper Potomac Aquifer, Middle Potomac Aquifer, and Lower Potomac Aquifer. Then up here they call this other hydrogeologic units. There are many other shallower aquifers in there. Just for your information, most domestic water, well, here's the vertical scale here, 500 feet, 1,000 feet, goes down to 4,500 feet here. Most of your domestic water wells are in these shallower aquifers, less than 500 feet deep. And then the Potomac Aquifer is pretty much the target for municipal wells and industrial wells, things like that. And some of these wells go down quite deep in the thousands of feet. And then the Taylorsville Basin. Here, this part of the USGS wasn't so concerned about the Taylorsville Basin, but the Taylorsville Basin would be in this part down here, what they just call basement bedrock. The Potomac Aquifer is the source for large groundwater withdrawals, such as paper mills in the southern part of the DEQ groundwater control area. For example, the mills at Franklin and West Point withdraw 20 to 30 million gallons per day. This amounts to billions and billions of gallons per year. Just as an example, a hydraulically fractured well in Virginia, ones that use water use typically 0 to 300,000 gallons of water. So a lot of the wells fractured in the southwestern part of the state literally use 0 water because they're done with nitrogen fracs. But the ones that use water typically use about 300,000 gallons of water, and that would be a one-time use. Okay, just to summarize, the Taylorsville Basin is an important potential future source of any energy for Virginia, and it fits in there with some other things like offshore wind and possibly offshore oil and gas that may be future energy sources. Natural gas is likely to be found, if it's found in the Taylorsville Basin, it's likely to be found in tight shale reservoirs. In other words, this area has been drilled before. The rocks that were encountered were not naturally porous, naturally able to flow large quantities of gas without some sort of stimulation. The natural gas resources in the Taylorsville Basin are present beneath several freshwater aquifers, and those aquifers would be subject to the Code of Virginia and our own agency's regulations that require freshwater drilling and casing through those aquifers. And my colleague Rick Cooper will be telling you more about those requirements. Thank you.
Thank you all for inviting me up here tonight. And again, my name is Rick Cooper, and I am the Director of the Virginia Division of Gas and Oil. And what I hope to cover today is, some of the drilling that has been conducted in the Taylorsville area, the casing design that is required, and some of the conditions that are required in the Tidewater region. Some of the laws and codes that Tidewater region falls under, you have the Virginia Gas and Oil Act, the Virginia Gas and Oil Regulations, we have Virginia Gas and Oil Board Regulations, we have the State Water Control Law, Department of Environmental Quality, we have the Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Regulations, and we also have the, I'll be talking about here, the Virginia Code 62.1, 195.1. And a couple of things I will talk about here is the Tidewater region is specific that it requires a special permit, and I did bring a copy of that to you all. It's an environmental impact assessment. It's pretty comprehensive, so anybody that drills in this area has to submit that to us and also with the Department of Environmental Quality. We work closely with DEQ to assure that all the conditions are met. It has a lot of requirements. I won't get into all of those, but you have to do an air quality analysis. You have to have a geological cross-section, more detailed than what Mr. Spears talked about. You have to do a hydrology analysis, and you have to tell us where you're going to put the well and all the conditions and all the surrounding areas around that. And also in the Tidewater region, you cannot drill around the Chesapeake Bay. Anywhere around the tributaries, there's no drilling allowed. And in this EIA, the operator has to give a detailed plan of where the well is going and any structures around that. They also have to do an analysis of the water in the area, and up to 1 mile radius of the well, they have to define all the waters that would be used for public use. They also have to define any tributaries 10 miles down the stream that would be used for public consumption. It's pretty detailed. And this right here is a similar slide that Mr. Spears talked about earlier. Taylorsville area here in King George up in here. We have had several wells drilled up in here, and we do not have any historical information of any permanent water damage at all. And what this slide right here leads to, the ones in the green here are the ones in the green on a previous slide. And you can look here, it tells, this would be the counties. Over here's King George County and the company that drilled it. It also tells the date it was drilled and the depth. And several of these wells were drilled 3,000, 5,000, 8,000, and two of our deepest wells drilled in the state of Virginia were drilled in the Taylorsville area. And you can see they were drilled at 10,000 feet. You can see these over here. That's two of our deepest wells ever drilled in the state of Virginia. So when you drill in the area, the operator is responsible for conducting a groundwater analysis of any water wells within the area. And any water that he drills with has to be equal to or better than any analysis that is conducted on that. And the analysis is conducted by the Department of Environmental Quality. It's under their groundwater criteria. And so all the analysis and all this is submitted up front prior to issuing a permit. And we do not have any permits in this area, as mentioned earlier. And just a couple of slides here just to tell you or give you a quick depiction of how a well is drilled. So when you drill a well, you really have to determine what size hole you want at the bottom. And generally that's a 4.5 or 6.5 inch hole. So when you do that, you actually design the well from the bottom up. And that would determine what size of casing and how many strings of casing that you would set. And just remember, these next two slides, they have no scale to them. They're just for demonstrative purposes. Whether this be 50 feet or 500 feet or 2,000 feet, it's still the same thing. We have water tables and we have a production zone down at the bottom. So the operator would do his background research, his geology research, his hydrology research, and he would anticipate anything that he would find while he was drilling. And so he would actually run these casings through this aquifer, and in the Tidewater region specifically, you are required to set a minimum 2,500 feet of steel casing or 300 feet below the lowest known water source. So if you hit water, if they set 2,500 feet, hit water again at 2,800 feet, they would have to run a second string of casing. And all these casings are cemented in, and we'll talk about that on this next slide. It's a requirement in the Tidewater region that all casing be cemented under pressure. And so the way that is done, this demonstration right here, you have casing being run down in the well, and they put a packer in there. It serves sort of like a check valve, so when a truck comes in and actually puts cement down the annulus of the hole, it creates an equal pressure so that the cement comes back up the back side of the casing, where it bonds to the casing and also bonds to the annulus of the well. And again, this is not your just general hardware type of cement. It's a Class A Portland cement. It's a high quality cement, and it works really well. Also, when this cement is installed, it is required to sit for a minimum of 8 hours prior to drilling again. This right here is just a typical cross section of any well that you'd look at. Could have 3, 4, 5, you could even have 6 strings of casing in that. These are all cemented in place, and they serve multi-purposes. Most important, our regulations are designed to protect the fresh water. We do specific inspections on these sites. So when these water protection strings are set and cemented, we do site-specific inspections to assure that they are conducted properly. And just to let you know, they're not always 10 o'clock in the morning. They could be 10 o'clock at night. They could be 12 o'clock on a Saturday. But we do try to arrange our schedule to assure that we see this, because the heart of the gas and oil regulation is protection of the water stream. We know it's a precious commodity everywhere in the state of Virginia. So I just want to point out that we do our very best to make sure that these are cemented properly. And also, by code in Virginia, if there is any permanent water loss, the operator is responsible for replacing that water. And if he has to drill a well or whatever, it is his responsibility. But I can tell you, as of today, we've had over 10,000 wells drilled in Virginia, and we do not have any record of any permanent water loss on any well in the state of Virginia. And a quick slide here just to tell about the fracturing process. As you can see, there's 2 types of wells you can have. This will be 2. You can have a vertical well, which is straight up and down, or a horizontal well. And the only difference is when you drill the horizontal, it's exposing more of a particular geological cross-section that the operator thinks will produce gas. And the way this is hydraulically fractured is that the operator would actually put little holes in the casing along this area, and he would apply the pressure. And we talk about hydrofracking or hydraulic fracturing. Whatever material they use, they would force it down into this well, and it would actually crack or fracture the rock. And these fractures are very small. They go 500 feet or so, and it just allows the gas to escape. And the thing I'd point out here, the operator also permits this up front, that any casing used in this hole is rated at 110% of any anticipated pressures they put in there. So that takes away the worry of a casing failure. And with the multiple strings of casing, it assures it even more. And the thing I'd talk about, as a general rule in Virginia, shales are just not good water zoned. Shales are just not good rocks to use water on. Nitrogen is the most prominent source to use, and as most of you know, we breathe about 78% of the nitrogen. It's a very clean fracture. There's very little residue that goes in or comes out. It's very safe to the environment, and it works really well. And again, the shales, that is what we use on the shales in Virginia. And the thing I'd point out right here, I'd encourage everyone to go to frackfocus.org. It's a website that's been put up for a lot of the states in America, and currently Virginia is having all their operators place their information up here. And what that does, they put all the components they use in a hydraulic fracturing process on the website. It's open for everyone to view, and it's a very good source of information. And also, we have found out that over the years, the wells are very environmentally friendly with wildlife. As you can see here, whether it be a bear, we have a lot of deer, and we know we're always concerned about the farm areas. They're very compatible with cattle, goats, horses, all kinds of wildlife. We have a good history and documentation of that being done, and we've had no problems on that. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I ask him a question?
No?
focus, so thank you.
Anyone have any specific questions for these gentlemen tonight?
Can I ask a couple?
Sure.
Okay. So with regards to the exploratory wells, you stated that one used hydraulic fracturing, but the other wells, did they actually use chemicals? And when they did the exploratory wells, were chemicals utilized?
Those were a long time ago. We have the drilling reports and completion reports. As far as I know, they were drilled on air.
Air drilling. And out here now, everything would be drilled on water drilling out in here. It just works much better. It cools the bits, so the drills in tidal water would be drilled on water. It takes very little water, 5,000 gallons of water or 10,000 gallons of water is all it takes to drill a well.
Okay, so am I taking away no chemicals were used for the exploratory wells?
The records don't indicate that it was a chemical composition type of fracture. And it was in 1968.
If by way of full disclosure, we do, the frac job that was done in 1968 used water and hydrochloric acid. That was old technology. No one does that.
Okay. And then, oh, okay. You added to your presentation the amount of water, because I had asked you at the presentation in Lancaster about the amount of water utilized. And you stated at the presentation last week that information would actually be provided to you in the application, that the company would state how much water would be used to drill the well site. So I'm wondering, what is your source now for this amount of water that you have?
That was historical documentation of what we have generally used. That is the largest amounts that we have documented that has been used. So we gave, you're talking about the 0 to 300,000?
Yes.
That is the largest amount that we've been used. As a general rule, 75 to 100,000 gallons is all that we use on a well.
And is that for nitrogen fracking, these amounts of water?
No, that would be not for nitrogen fracking.
We're seeing it for the first time, so we're digesting the information. We'll have more opportunity.
All right. How long does it actually take to complete an environmental impact assessment, typically?
So we haven't had one since 1992, but I guess with some of the conversations we've had with DEQ, you're probably talking 3 to 6 months. I really do not know any more other than that. 3 to 6 months at a minimum. For the operator to put together the EIA assessment and submit it to us.
Right, and then DEQ takes a few months to review it afterwards.
That's correct. They would have their time of review, and then we would have our time of review also.
Okay. And then, all right, so if they do this environmental impact assessment, they base that impact on the number of wells? And how do they determine how many wells in advance that they would actually have? Because I'm just asking here, the more wells you have, would there be a greater impact?
There would be an EIA required for every permit that they submitted for. So, for every well they submit for. So, if they drill one well today and then drill one 5 years from now, they would have to conduct another EIA analysis and submit it prior to getting permit approval.
So they have to get a permit for every single well,
That is correct.
and they have to do the environmental impact analysis for every single well.
That is correct.
All right, and, okay, so now, based on some research that I've been doing where Shore in the past has assigned their leases to Exxon, who then in turn assigned the leases to Texaco. So my question today is, if Shore submits this environmental impact analysis with their permit application, but in actuality, they've assigned the leases to Texaco, and Texaco's actually doing the fracking. Does it just transfer over?